The Moonbat. An aircraft meant to revolutionize aerial warfare, but it burned in its own flames before it ever truly flew. This is the story of a great failure that became a silent harbinger of the future. Its streamlined fuselage was an aerodynamic masterpiece, a concept decades ahead of its time. The goal, speed and power, capable of catching any threat. But the dream was paralyzed by experimental engines that constantly burned and failed. Again and again, the test pilots snatched this machine from the jaws of fire and destruction, dueling a visionary's genius against the ruthless limits of his era. So what is true success, and what is failure? Was the Moonbat just a tragic mistake, or was it an unwitting teacher whose lessons changed the face of aviation forever? The 1940s. The world was choking on the smoke of war. In the skies over Europe and the Pacific, dramas were unfolding that would decide the fate of humanity. The air boiled with the fury of bombers, while fighters, like packs of predators, fought for every inch of sky. In this hell, something more than just an improved machine was needed. What was needed was a leap forward, a revolution. The U.S. Army Air Forces put out a call, announcing the R-40C program. The nation needed more than just a fighter. It needed a bomber-destroyer, an aircraft capable of soaring to great heights with unprecedented speed, catching any threat, and unleashing a storm of fire upon it. It was a call to the boldest minds, a call that encouraged radical, even crazy ideas. And among those who dared to answer was James McDonnell, a visionary, a designer with a fire in his eyes, the founder of McDonnell Aircraft, for whom aviation was always a field for the most audacious experiments. McDonnell did not look for easy paths. His first concepts were so bold that they seemed like science fiction even against the backdrop of war. Take his Model 1, a single-engine machine where the motor was buried deep in the fuselage, and two pusher propellers on the wings were driven by a complex system of long shafts and gearboxes. The goal? To minimize drag, to achieve unparalleled aerodynamic purity. The project, which placed 21st out of 23 proposals, was deemed too risky, but its aerodynamic solutions caught the military's attention, showing that McDonnell thought outside the box. These were the very ideas that became the seeds of a future legend. From the ashes of Model 1, after passing through the refined concepts of Model 2 and 2A, a new project was born. A project that soon received a name shrouded in mystique and the promise of superiority, the XP-67, the Moonbat. It was also called the Bat, or the Flying Fillet, for its smooth, flowing lines. This was an aircraft meant to anticipate the future. Its design was not just innovative, it was revolutionary, the blended wing-body concept. The fuselage of the XP-67 was itself an airfoil, shaped to generate lift, merging perfectly with the main wings. Laminar flow profiles were used across its entire surface, so the air would flow over the plane like water over a smooth stone, with almost no resistance. The two engine nacelles were not just attached, but elegantly integrated into the wing, as extensions of a single, organic whole. On paper, the XP-67 seemed like a weapon from the future. Its projected top speed was a staggering 472 miles per hour at altitude. This was significantly faster than any existing fighter, which barely approached 400 miles per hour. It was meant to climb like a rocket, easily chasing down any bomber. And its armament? 6 37mm M4 cannons in the nose. Not machine guns, but true cannons, each burst capable of tearing an enemy bomber to pieces. There was even talk of installing a 75mm cannon, turning the fighter into a flying artillery battery. For the production version, a pressurized cockpit was planned, a luxury ensuring comfort at extreme altitudes, which only underscored the project's ambition. On September 30th, 1941, McDonnell Aircraft received a contract to build 2 prototypes. On that day, the story of the XP-67 Moonbat began, an aircraft born from a daring dream, destined to become both a symbol of unfulfilled hopes and a herald of aviation wonders to come. The sky was waiting for its predator. The contract was signed. The dream of the Moonbat, that sleek, lethal predator of the skies, was officially off the drawing board. But between the bold vision and a functional aircraft lay a gulf of engineering challenges, an agonizing odyssey that would test the very limits of ingenuity and patience. Every curve, every joint of this flying fillet was meticulously scrutinized. The radical concept of the fuselage itself, generating lift, a true airfoil in its cross-section, demanded unprecedented precision. This wasn't just metal forming. It was the art of making airflow exactly as the designers intended. Imagine, if you will, craftsmen carving a massive, intricate blade, each facet designed to minimize drag, to slice through the atmosphere with an unearthly grace. This quest for aerodynamic purity extended to the entire surface of the aircraft. Those vaunted laminar flow airfoils, promising near frictionless passage through the air, were an engineer's dream and a manufacturer's nightmare. Any imperfection, any slightly raised rivet head, any ripple in the skin could disrupt the delicate laminar flow, shattering the dream of unmatched speed. The McDonnell teams wrestled with unheard-of tolerances, pushing the boundaries of construction methods. It was less like building an aircraft and more like crafting a giant, airborne scientific instrument. And then there was the heart of the beast, 2 experimental Continental ECI 1430 engines. Inverted V12s, liquid-cooled, they were designed to churn out immense thrust. On paper, they were a perfect match for the Moonbat's audacious ambitions. But they were also experimental, unproven. A calculated risk, yes, but one that held the potential for catastrophic failure. These 2 cutting-edge, yet still untested power plants were seamlessly integrated into the wing nacelles. It was a bold gamble, staking the fate of the entire project not just on radical aerodynamics, but on the raw, unpredictable power of emerging technology. That choice alone whispered of both revolutionary triumph and profound peril. Slowly, painstakingly, the blueprints began to take shape. By April 1942, a full-scale wooden mock-up stood proudly in the workshop. It was massive, weighing some 18,500 pounds, a tangible representation of abstract lines and equations. Here, designers and engineers walked its contours, spotting potential discrepancies, refining every detail, imagining the pilot seated in its futuristic cockpit. The Moonbat was no longer just an idea. It was a looming, physical presence, almost ready to taste the sky. But even as the first prototype neared completion, the cold, pragmatic winds of war began to blow. The relentless pace of military innovation meant that delays were unforgivable, and cost overruns, especially on an experimental project, were a luxury the nation could not afford. By October 1943, a grim announcement swept through the McDonnell shops. The contract for the second prototype was canceled. Just like that, the grand vision, once planned for a pair of these magnificent machines, was now down to a single, solitary hope. It was a stark reminder that even the most brilliant engineering could not outrun the unforgiving realities of a world at war. The Moonbat had lost its sibling before it ever took its first breath, leaving the lone survivor to carry the entire weight of expectation. The stage was set. One aircraft, burdened with the hopes of a nation and the dreams of its creators, stood on the threshold. Its maiden flight was awaited as a moment of truth, one that would either validate its audacious design or expose the raw, painful limits of an era struggling to catch up with its own future. Months of painstaking work, days and nights over blueprints, thousands of nervously placed rivets and miles of wiring, it all converged on a single point. After the cancellation of the second prototype, the entire weight of McDonnell Aircraft's ambitions rested on the shoulders of this single, magnificent beast. The Moonbat, this flying fillet, was no longer just an idea. It was a reality. And so, in December 1943, at Lambert Field in St. Louis, under the watchful eyes of engineers, workers, and military officials, this sleek, futuristic, silver predator emerged from the assembly hangar for the first time. The air was thick with a tension mixed with euphoria. Finally, after so many delays, after all the challenges, this engineering masterpiece was ready to breathe the air. But before it could soar into the sky, it had to endure a baptism of fire. Ground tests. December 8, 1943. The cold December air of St. Louis chilled to the bone, but on the runway, it was hot. The heart of this machine was two experimental Continental AN 1430 engines, powerful but still temperamental units. At the controls sat E.E. Ed Elliott, McDonnell's chief test pilot, a man whose nerves were steel and whose reactions were lightning fast. He already knew what it was like to dance on the edge of disaster, but even for him, what was about to happen was a shock. The plane began to move, gaining speed on the taxiway. The goal was to test its handling at high speeds, simulating a takeoff. The roar of the engines filled the air, promising power and speed. But suddenly, tongues of flame erupted from the engine nacelles, right over the wings, not one, but two fiery torches, simultaneously consuming vital systems. Instant realization. Catastrophe. Right before its first flight, the sole prototype, in which so much hope and resources had been invested, could turn into a pile of charred metal. Panic would have seized any other pilot, but not Elliott. His mind worked faster than the fire. Instead of abandoning the cockpit, he made a decision that bordered on madness, but saved the project. Gritting his teeth, Elliott immediately shut down both engines. They were already on fire. Stopping them could only slow the spread of the flames, and activated the fire extinguishing system. But that wasn't enough. The plane continued to move on its own momentum, shrouded in smoke and flames. Every second counted. He steered the Moonbat toward the fire crew, which was already racing to meet him, but time was measured in fractions of a second. The pilot was, in effect, steering the burning aircraft directly into the hands of the rescuers. The cause of the fire turned out to be deceptively simple: faults in the engine exhaust systems, which caused overheating and ignition of fuel or oil. The fire was extinguished, but its mark was terrible. The skin was melted, internal systems were damaged. The very aerodynamically pure fuselage, so meticulously crafted, now bore the scars of fire. Instead of a triumphant first flight, there were weeks, long, grueling weeks of repair. The project stalled again. The delay was not just a temporary setback. It was a blow to an already stretched timeline, to the military's eroded trust. In a time of war, when every machine counted and every minute was critical, the XP-67 had shown its vulnerability before it ever left the ground. But the Moonbat was saved. Saved thanks to one man, whose composure and fearlessness gave it a second chance. A chance that, as time would show, would have to be won from fate again and again, after weeks of grueling repairs, after the Bat miraculously avoided becoming a charred heap of metal before its first flight. The long-awaited dawn of January 6, 1944, finally arrived. In the St. Louis air, besides the January cold, hung a tension so thick you could almost touch it. This was the moment of truth. Test pilot Ed Elliott, who had already endured a baptism of fire in this very plane, once again took his place in the futuristic cockpit. He was finally about to take the XP-67 into the sky, a machine filled with so many hopes, so many engineering dreams. The takeoff was flawless, graceful. The aircraft lifted off the ground like a predator finally released from its cage. The engineers below, holding their breath, watched as the Moonbat climbed swiftly, its streamlined form slicing through the air. The dream, it seemed, had found its wings. But this idyll lasted for exactly 6 minutes. Just 6 minutes. Suddenly, thick smoke billowed from the nacelles of the 2 experimental Continental Unknown 1430 engines. Not fire this time, but the harbinger of a more insidious problem: overheating. The gauges were redlining. The power plants, whose untamed power was meant to be the XP-67's greatest virtue, were failing again, having barely begun to work. Without hesitation, Elliott made his decision. An emergency descent, a lightning-fast approach for landing. He brought the bat back to the ground intact, but the illusion of its omnipotence was shattered. More modifications followed, redesigns of the cooling system. The McDonnell engineers, like alchemists, tried to squeeze the promised power out of these temperamental engines without letting them burn up or melt down. The second and third flights later that January were more stable, but were flown under gentle conditions. The aircraft showed good handling, but its true potential remained locked away by chronic malfunctions. It seemed every step forward revealed 2 new problems. The real drama unfolded during the 4th test flight. The plane gained altitude, and Elliott increased the throttle. Then came a horrifying metallic screech. The engines, on which the entire project rested, rebelled. One after another, they went into runaway, a critical overspeed condition leading to self-destruction. From the vibration and aerodynamic shock, the cockpit canopy was torn from its moorings and ripped away into the void. Imagine the horror. At altitude, in an open cockpit, exposed to the freezing wind, with 2 dying, disintegrating engines. Any other pilot might have panicked, ejected. But Ed Elliott was a man whose biography was written with nerves of steel and limitless composure. He remained in his seat, fighting an aircraft that was literally falling apart in the air. With incredible skill, he seemed to be talking to the doomed machine, pleading with it to stay airborne. Miraculously, by sheer force of will and talent, he once again landed the XP-67 on the runway, snatching it from the jaws of certain disaster. This was not just a flight. It was a duel between man and machine, a duel in which the man, once again, emerged victorious. Another repair followed. These experimental Continental Unknown 1430 engines, it turned out, were not just temperamental. They were fundamentally unreliable, constantly suffering from overheating, a lack of power, and now, a tendency to completely self-destruct. In desperation, McDonnell's engineers replaced them with new, also experimental units, but the problems multiplied. The project that promised to be a bomber killer could now barely get itself off the ground. The claimed 472 miles per hour remained an impossible dream. When flight testing resumed on March 23, 1944, there was little optimism left. By May of that year, the Army Command, tired of the endless delays and problems, sent its own test pilots for an independent evaluation. Their verdict was grim and sounded like a death sentence. On May 11th, an Army pilot concluded, the aircraft was underpowered, sluggish, with a poor rate of climb and a low top speed. In fact, the recorded 405 miles per hour at altitude was far from the design specifications, and worse, was inferior to fighters already in service, like the P-51D Mustang, which could reach up to 440 miles per hour with war emergency power. The Moonbat was becoming obsolete before it ever had a chance to fly properly. By the end of the summer of 1944, the XP-67 had logged only about 42 or 43 hours of flight time. Every hour in the air was a hard-won battle, filled with breakdowns, emergency landings, and the pilot's heroic efforts. This bold engineering concept, designed to revolutionize air combat, had collided with the harsh reality of its era's imperfect technology. The project was not yet canceled, but the specter of impending failure loomed over it. The question was not if this odyssey would end, but when, and at what cost. After countless modifications, weeks of frantic problem-solving, and replacing one temperamental set of engines with another, equally problematic one, the Bat was back on the runway. There was far less optimism than on the day it was first rolled out of the hangar. Every second in the air was snatched from fate, every flight a new chapter in a chronicle of technical failures. But time was not waiting. The war was intensifying, and the U.S. Army Air Forces Command, weary of the endless delays and the heroic but constantly troubled flights, decided it was time to put an end to the story. In May 1944, they arrived at Lambert Field. Not McDonnell engineers, not the familiar face of Ed Elliott. These were official test pilots from the Army Air Forces. Their mission was simple and ruthless: to evaluate the XP-67 Moonbat without bias, without the rose-tinted glasses of ambition, based only on hard numbers and the feel in the cockpit. Their verdict would be either a sentence or a triumph. When one of the Army pilots first took this futuristic aircraft into the sky, he may have felt the full power of the engineering vision captured in its streamlined form. The blended wing-body concept, the laminar flow airfoils, it all screamed of the future, anticipating the design of aircraft that would only appear decades later. The Flying Fillet, as it was aptly nicknamed, was the embodiment of James McDonnell's dream of a revolutionary fighter. But the dream collided with reality. The flights were short, harsh, with no allowances for its experimental nature. With every minute in the air, it became clear. This machine, this bomber-destroyer of dreams, just didn't have the muscle. The engines, for which reliability had been sacrificed, and which had caused so many accidents, were catastrophically underpowered. The promised 472 miles per hour at altitude remained a figure on paper. Instead, the instruments recorded a mere 405 miles per hour, almost 70 miles per hour short. This wasn't just a disappointment, it was a chasm. The true scale of the failure became obvious in comparison. Back in 1941, when the XP-67 was just taking shape on blueprints, 472 miles per hour would have been an unheard-of speed. But by May 1944, as battles raged over Europe and the Pacific, a completely different class of machine was already in service. Take the P-51D Mustang, for example. This combat-proven fighter, with its war emergency power engaged, easily reached 440 miles per hour. It was agile, reliable, and its rate of climb was never in question. And the XP-67? The Army pilot's summary was brief and merciless. The aircraft was underpowered, sluggish, with a poor rate of climb and a low top speed. Sluggish acceleration, an agonizing climb, a constant struggle for every knot of speed. Even without its planned formidable armament, be it the 6 37mm cannons or the fantastical 75mm gun, which was supposed to make it a true bomber hunter, the Moonbat could barely fly. How could anyone imagine this aerial limousine, fitted with heavy guns and armor, being able to intercept enemy bombers at high altitude if it couldn't even match the speed of existing fighters? With each new report from the Army pilots, the dream of a bomber-destroyer crumbled to dust. The program, which had consumed millions of dollars and years of labor, was effectively deemed irrelevant and unpromising. The Moonbat was obsolete before it ever really flew. Its visionary aerodynamics were paralyzed by its imperfect engines. This wasn't just a technical failure. It was a verdict on the idea itself. And although the official decision to cancel the project had not yet been announced, its fate was sealed. The airspace of 1944 demanded not ambitious prototypes, but reliable, combat-proven machines. And the XP-67, with its 40-odd hours of flight time filled with accidents and breakdowns, had no more chances to prove its worth. The sky had delivered its final judgment. By the end of summer 1944, despite the heroic efforts of Ed Elliott and endless modifications, the specter of imminent cancellation loomed over the sole XP-67 prototype. It had flown just over 40 hours, each one a battle won from fate, marred by breakdowns, failures, and near catastrophes. The military command had already delivered its verdict, deeming the Moonbat underpowered and hopelessly obsolete. But the project was not yet officially canceled. There were still unfinished, mostly routine flight tests to complete. For long weeks, months, the atmosphere at Lambert Field was one of anticipation for the inevitable end. And then, on September 6, 1944, that premonition became reality. That day was supposed to be ordinary. Another boring flight, a few more minutes in the air to gather data that no longer mattered. Ed Elliott, an old acquaintance of this capricious machine, once again took his place in the cockpit. Behind him were hours spent battling the untamable Continental M1 1430 engines, experience with emergency landings involving overheating, grinding noises, and even a torn-off canopy. He knew this aircraft better than anyone. He knew its character, its weaknesses, its fatal flaws, and he was prepared for routine. The XP-67 lifted off the runway, heavily but steadily. It climbed into the sky. Another series of measurements, another systems check. Everything was going according to plan. But suddenly, as if the sky itself decided to put a final dramatic end to this story, a fiery torch erupted from the right engine nacelle. Fire. Again. But this time, not on the ground, like on that first fateful day of high-speed taxiing, but thousands of feet above the earth. In the cockpit, Elliott felt the jolt, heard the roar of the flames, saw the flashes. Hellish heat on his right. His thoughts raced. What to do? Jump? No, he couldn't. In his blood was something more than the instinct for self-preservation. His biography was written in courage, and his reputation as a savior pilot was cemented by this very aircraft, which he refused to abandon. He could have ejected, saved himself. But then this futuristic masterpiece of engineering, held hostage by its flawed engines, would have crashed to the ground in a heap of wreckage. Elliott could not let that happen. He made an instant decision. Emergency descent. Just as before, his hands and feet moved with incredible precision. The burning plane seemed to obey his will. The Moonbat, with a tail of flame and smoke, dove towards its home runway. It was a race against time, against physics, against death itself. And once again, almost impossibly, he succeeded. The plane touched down on the concrete, rolled down the runway. The landing was flawless. It seemed a miracle had happened again. He had saved the XP-67. For a moment, a tiny, deceptive moment, it seemed history would repeat itself. The plane would be repaired, and the fight would continue. But fate had other plans. The fire was raging in the right nacelle. He had to immediately turn the aircraft into the wind to prevent the flames from spreading to the fuselage, to give the firefighters a chance to contain the blaze. Elliot pressed the brake pedals, trying to turn the machine. And then, a failure. The right brake didn't work. Perhaps it was due to the fire. Perhaps it was yet another frustrating malfunction that plagued every system of the XP-67. Either way, the plane could not turn. It stood on the runway, stubborn, immobile, as the wind caught the flames, fanning them like a blacksmith's bellows. Every second was critical. The fire, which had started in the experimental engine, was now greedily consuming the wing, closing in on the fuselage, on the fuel tanks. Elliot, powerless to do anything more, finally abandoned the blazing cockpit. Before the eyes of everyone gathered at the airfield, this ambitious symbol of bygone hopes and unfulfilled promises turned into a fiery inferno. Metal twisted and melted. The streamlined forms designed to cut through the air like a bullet were distorted by the heat. The Moonbat burned brightly and terribly, like a final salute. The fire crews were helpless. They could only watch as the great engineering dream, this visionary project that anticipated the future of aviation, turned to ash. This was the end, final and irrevocable. A week after the fire, on September 13, 1944, the U.S. Army Air Forces officially canceled the XP-67 program. There was no longer any point in continuing without the sole-flying prototype. The Moonbat never saw the sky to its full potential. It did not become a bomber killer. It did not reach unimaginable speeds. But its story is not one of complete failure. It is a chronicle of courage, perseverance, and the tragic encounter of brilliant engineering with the brutal reality of its era's technological limitations. In that final fiery flight, the XP-67 did not just burn. It was forever etched in the annals of aviation as a warning and a harbinger, proof that sometimes to truly fly, you must first learn how to fall. And only from the ruins of unfulfilled ambitions are new, even bolder dreams born. After the fire consumed the last prototype and black soot was permanently ground into the concrete of Lambert Field, it seemed that the story of the XP-67 Moonbat had come to its inglorious end. The official cancellation of the program by the U.S. Army Air Forces on September 13, 1944, was merely a formality, a statement of a fact that no one disputed. The project, which had consumed millions of dollars and years of intense labor, was extinguished. But in those ashes, in that wreckage of unfulfilled ambitions, lay something more than just failure. For James McDonnell, the founder of McDonnell Aircraft, this was perhaps the most painful, but also the most important, lesson. He saw a world where ideas, not just machines, took flight. His company, which had strived for revolutionary breakthroughs from the very beginning, could not afford to get stuck in the past. While his piston engine bomber killer was burning on the ground, entirely different work was already underway in McDonnell's secret hangars. Work on jet engines, begun even before the Bat's final fiasco, now became the primary focus. An ambitious request for a new jet fighter for the Navy seemed to be waiting just for them. Thus, the F-H Phantom was born, McDonnell's first jet fighter, a machine that would soon take to the sky, heralding a completely new era. By abandoning piston engines, the shackles that had bound the XP-67, the company made a giant leap forward that would ultimately turn it into an aerospace giant, later known as McDonnell Douglas. But let's return to the Moonbat. Can it be called a failure? Yes. In the context of immediate military needs and its stated performance, it was a complete disappointment. Its lack of power, sluggish climb rate, and chronic engine problems, all of this was a death sentence. But if you take a step back, if you look at this aircraft through the prism of decades, it becomes clear. The XP-67 was not just an unsuccessful prototype. It was a visionary failure, generations ahead of its time. Its blended wing body, a concept where the aircraft's fuselage itself was a lifting surface with a true airfoil profile, was the embodiment of the dream of minimizing drag and maximizing lift. Combined with the laminar flow profiles used on the wings, this project was an aerodynamic masterpiece. It was designed to slice through the air with an efficiency unattainable for most aircraft of its time. It was these advanced ideas, these forms that screamed of the future, that proved too complex to realize with the level of technology available in the 1940s. The experimental Continental Mannheim 1430 engines, on which so much hope was placed, turned out to be its Achilles heel, paralyzing the full potential of its engineering genius. And yet, the whisper of this future echoed through the decades. Today, look at the silhouette of the B-2 Spirit stealth bomber, its smooth, integrated lines, or the elegant, seamless forms of the F-22 Raptor fighter, where every element works toward maximum aerodynamic efficiency and low observability. Can a direct parallel be drawn? Perhaps not in terms of specific blueprints, but the spirit, the concept, the drive for a single, harmonious, lifting body that minimizes drag, all of that was in the air long before they appeared. It was an idea that the XP-67 Moonbat dared to embody first, albeit tragically unsuccessfully. Thus, despite its immediate collapse, the XP-67 did not simply vanish in flames. It became a silent testament to the fact that sometimes, to truly fly, you must first learn how to fall. Its story is not only a chronicle of unfulfilled dreams, but also an ode to courage, engineering foresight, and the willingness to take risks. It is forever inscribed in the annals of aviation as a precursor to innovation, a reminder that the true value of a breakthrough is measured not only by immediate success, but by the seeds of the future it sows, even if it doesn't live to see them sprout. A prototype burned in its flames, but the idea lived on, and its echoes can be heard in the skies even today. The story of the XP-67 Moonbat is not just a chronicle of an unfulfilled dream, but a powerful testament that a true breakthrough often outpaces its time, running up against the limits of the possible. It is a tale of brilliant engineering paralyzed by the technological constraints of its era, but whose ideas, like seeds, still sprouted decades later, shaping the contours of the future. So what, then, should be considered a true success, and what a failure? And how many other such unsuccessful projects lie hidden in forgotten blueprints, waiting for their moment to be reimagined? Share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe to the channel, and hit the like button if you enjoyed this journey into the past and future of aviation.